Are you excited?
Yes.
How excited?
Very.
Who's that?
Coolest person ever, next to you.
But who?
Sherlock Holmes. Didn't you know?
So I have a thing for Sherlock Holmes. Sue me. I've been enamored nearly my entire life by the tall, dark, consulting detective. I say nearly as the position of first childhood crush was occupied by another man, known for his hat and outerwear. But Sherlock Holmes has been one of the most lasting, most effective characters I've encountered over the years. And that shouldn't surprise me, the fandom has been going strong over a century. I have Wishbone to thank for my initial introduction to Mr. Holmes. Their adaptations of Scandal in Bohemia and Hound of the Baskervilles were some of my favorite episodes. Perfect for a kid weaned on Scooby-Doo who would eventually read thrice her weight in Nancy Drew books. Reading Sherlock Holmes seemed the logical progression. Though as far as film adaptations, all I had was Basil Rathbone and Masterpiece Theater until PBS started airing the Granada series around 2007. While all my friends were drooling over Justin Timberlake and Orlando Bloom, I was making snug me faces at Jeremy Brett. It was one of my first fandoms, and in this day and age of multiple adaptations, you could say I'm in hog heaven. Sherlock Holmes is a powerful, ubiquitous part of our culture. He's stock character, reference, symbol, and punchline all in one. Literally everywhere, and every generation has its adaptations. Sherlock Holmes joins rare characters like King Arthur and Robin Hood who become their own archetype. And as usual, each interpretation has as much to say about us as it does the story itself. So, what does our glut of Sherlock Holmes adaptations say about us? Apparently we like high-functioning sociopaths. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote the original Holmes vastly different from the normal heroes of the day. The average Victorian man of action had muscles, mustache, and a chin of granite. He shot first and philosophized much later, and he did everything to support his social superiors, no matter how intelligent the cause or how worthy his superiors were. Sherlock Holmes was not like that. Doyle's descriptions of him make him thin, gangly, and awkward. His actions weren't aggressive or confrontational, but short bursts of dogged pursuit that followed cerebral ruminating on the problem. He was a scientific hero who left the firearms to a former army doctor in the yard. And while Holmes was always too polite and courteous to be considered a rebel, he would buck any tradition he saw useless. He turned down knighthood twice and refused the boons of a Bohemian king. Clearly what 80% of the English population would have given their firstborn to have was not worth his time. Arguably, Sherlock Holmes could be considered literature's first anti-hero. An anti-hero without much wrong with him. Oh, he has flaws, for sure. He's arrogant, forgets little things like emotions and Copernican theory, as well as his on-again, off-again relationship with cocaine. And while all of those flaws do feel real, they don't stop Holmes from being a functional, healthy, even compassionate character. In canon, he was peculiar, but not completely removed from humanity. But times change, and while the essential character of Sherlock Holmes remained beloved, how he was adapted pushed the envelope in different ways. In the late 30s and early 40s, a series of films from 20th Century Fox and Universal were made with the incomparable Basil Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes and the classic Nigel Bruce's Dr. Watson. Our cultural shorthand for the world of Sherlock Holmes comes largely from these portrayals. The ever-present Deerstalker and Cape, Moriarty behind every plot, Watson as idiotic comic relief. These are all things Basil and Universal had given us rather than Sir Doyle. The war-era films certainly didn't paint Holmes with the nuanced brush that he had in his earlier or later incarnations. He was a Brit fighting Nazis and criminal boogeymen, with little room for ambiguity. As well as removing Watson as a competent character with agency, that left Holmes for all the intellectual and moral authority. Not to say Rathbone's Holmes was a boring hero. Basil used his years playing the villain against Errol Flynn to his advantage. In the midst of pulp action, Holmes is calm, cerebral, and makes no attempt to posture or assume power. Like the canon Sherlock before him, the 30s Sherlock was a unique riff on a hero of his time. I'll be skipping quite a few adaptations, as mainly I don't own them, and they didn't have quite the same cultural impact as some of the tentpole adaptations over the course of the centuries. Speaking of tentpoles, the definitive adaptation in the Sherlock Holmes fandom when I came into it was the Sherlock Holmes TV series by Granada. Jeremy Brett played Holmes, and he had the disturbing quality of being the actual character waltzing out of print onto celluloid. Brett is the once-and-future epitome of Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, and the show knew it. They painted Holmes as a mercurial, strange, compassionate, yet aloof figure. They didn't mask how little he connected with everyday society or even his drug problem, but they did show how much he cared for his friends. Holmes, as seen by a Welsh BBC production in the 80s and 90s, was an eccentric, flawed individual, but it made him an eternal beloved character. And that was the final word as far as my fellow fanfiction writers were concerned. So when an action-heavy, romance-riddled, steampunk blockbuster was announced for Holmes and Watson, the purists rose up in unholy wrath. Who is this Iron Man they got to play Sherlock Holmes? He can't be in love with Irene! They recycled the young Sherlock Holmes plot. He acts like a hyperactive drunk monkey. He's short! Needless to say, I walked into the theater for 2009's Sherlock Holmes with little faith in Guy Ritchie or Robert Downey Jr. But I had to admit that it was so much fun! It's popcorn Holmes and Watson at its finest, and the chemistry between Jude Law and Robert Downey Jr. allayed all worries. He's still too short, but it's definitely good steampunk fun. But the flagrant anachronisms weren't just limited to technology and cinematography. A grown man acting with all the audacity and energy in Victorian public would be committed to bedlam. Instead of the suave, courteous, if slightly offbeat Holmes of canon, RDJ is hyperactive, dubiously mature, and to the point of manic from sheer amount of stimuli. Prior adaptations had a very keep calm and carry on attitude concerning the negative aspects of Holmes' abilities. Now this adaptation shows very clearly that genius has a price, but not as clearly as the one that rode in on its coattails. Guy Ritchie's camera had barely cooled in 2010 when the BBC premiered Sherlock, which vaulted the world of Holmes and Watson into the 21st century. To say the show was a success would be an understatement, hence the steady feels of Trimmers and squeeing courtesy of Tumblr. It was helmed by Golden Boys of the Beeb, Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat, and starred beautiful alien Benedict Cumberbatch as the title character and professional straight man Martin Freeman as John Watson. What caused the most unease initially, the modern day setting, served to beautifully enhance the canonical accuracy rather than dull it. And as beloved as Benny's portrayal of Sherlock has become, it's also strikingly less human than any other Holmes. While his intellect is on warp drive, his emotional maturity better matches a 5-year-old. He is utterly disconnected from the feelings of others, much less of his own. He has to be reminded that people still care if he doesn't, and that people can still be hurt by the slightest of his words, to the point fans have speculated if this Sherlock is on the autism spectrum. For all his superhuman qualities, his shortcomings actually make him more human than anyone ever expected, including Sherlock. And you know, I'd be perfectly fine to make my point here. I've done enough analysis to support the modern interpretation of Sherlock Holmes. Genius is a costly attribute, and to American cinema that price is to be a manic man-child. To British television it's to be cold and out of sync with the majority of human experience. No one can accept a character that smart with all his marbles together in our media. If you're that smart, something's wrong with you. I was set and ready to make that my thesis and shove the Sheila down the pipeline. And then Elementary premiered. In glimpses and rumors, it seemed like the American Sherlock ripoff from mass media hell. Nearly every Sherlockian, Holmesian, and skeptical Tumblrite in between was giving this project the side eye. I was one of the few people who saw the trailer and said, "Looks alright to me. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice." But I was not fooled. I was very much impressed. While the plot didn't break any ground Jerry Bruckheimer hadn't already until late in the season, the characters consistently held my interest. Every single one. The female Watson we all feared would be a gimmick was played by none other than the fantastic Lucy Liu. Not only is she a fully realized, wonderful character with an unquestioned air of authority, she calls out societal hang-ups that sailed over everyone else's head, putting Sherlock in his place a couple times.
Ow!
Could have been a knife. Ow!
Could have been a knife. If you're on anything, strip on the couple turn blue.
I have a new theory about our killer.
Drug-free, congratulations. It's so incredible, the way that you solve people just by looking at them. I notice you don't have any mirrors around here.
What's that supposed to mean?
It means I think you know a lost cause when you see one.
And speaking of Sherlock Holmes, Johnny Lee Miller plays him like the overeager puppy in the pet store window. Instead of using his abilities to embarrass the average Joe or make him feel inferior, he uses them to comfort others. Of course he's arrogant, reckless, misses oodles of social cues, and is about as flexible as a mule with a small dictatorship, but he is powerfully compassionate and empathetic. And not only does he admit when he's wrong, but he acknowledges merit in the thing or person he overlooked. He's very gracious and curious, slowly relearning the world after an addiction. And therein lies the emotional center of the series. Holmes' drug habit takes the forefront in a way few other adaptations can boast, specifically the recovery from said addiction. We follow Holmes into the world of sponsors, triggers, and trying to prove to himself as well as everyone else that he can thrive beyond his greatest weakness. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we're looking for from today's dysfunctional detectives. Each Sherlock and every Holmes shows us a little more of what we hope to achieve. We are acutely aware we are imperfect creatures in an imperfect world. We want to believe we can be dashing superheroes despite our narcoses. We want to be on the side of the angels when we're certain we aren't one of them. We want to take the arm of our best friend and rise up in triumph over our greatest failures. I mean, yeah, other interpretations exist. Maybe we also want the comfort of thinking towering genius invites crippling hang-ups. Or we like the idea that if you're clever enough, you can be a jerk with no consequences. But I, however, am too much of an optimist to write off humanity or Sherlock Holmes completely. I'm T-Bell, your Philosophan. If you enjoyed, thanks for listening. If you didn't, I look forward to your flames, and consider the game on.
Forget to put the pipe in my mouth for the smell. We'll tell the neighbors that I'm on the beat again, so please don't pause at any strange and dark corners. But that's where I'm looking first. I'll rip the grocery, some yawns, and empty the contents of your purse. Me and you are me and you are me and you are me and you are oh,
Yes?
You forgot House.
I didn't own it.
We're marathoning it.
Lovely. House is like really a jerk.
At least it doesn't have a camera.